Hi, this is John Hayes. Some of you know me as K7VE, and I've presented a few of these DCC conferences, so you may have heard me before. Hopefully that won't scare you away. I recently became the outreach manager for amateur radio digital communications. I'd like to spend a little time with you today discussing the organization and our grants and some of our technology work that we're doing. The mission of ARDC is to support, promote, and enhance digital communication and broader communication science and technology to promote amateur radio, scientific research, experimentation, education, development, open access, and innovation in information and communication technology. ARDC was formed just a couple of years ago. We're a fairly young foundation. We were formed out of amateur packet radio, sometimes known as AMPER.org, AMPERNet, or Net 44. Our board of directors is taken from a variety of disciplines, ham radio operators that are very dedicated and volunteer their services to the furthering of the aims of ARDC. We now also have a staff that includes Rosie Wolf, who is our executive director, Chris Smith out of the UK, who is the AMPERNet administrator and manages ARDC's IT offerings. We have Chelsea, who is our grants manager. We have Dan, who is the content manager. He writes our blog and press releases and those types of things. Then there's me, John Hayes, and I'm the outreach manager, as I stated earlier, and Meredith Stroh, who is our administrative coordinator. We have two primary missions within ARDC. Each has an advisory committee that's a standing committee. One is the Grants Advisory Committee. We'll be talking somewhat at length during this presentation of their work, and also the Technical Advisory Committee, which oversees the amateur radio internet aspect of ARDC. And the chair for the grants is myself. I have been the grants chair since its formation in 2020. And Jan, who has taken up the responsibilities from Germany over our technical advisory committee. She has a great resume, is one of the driving forces behind a number of initiatives in Germany, including Hamnet, which is TCP/IP over RF, networking all kinds of resources throughout Europe. So on the grant side of the house, we are charged with distributing a fairly large amount of money every year, several $1 million. We haven't reached our goal yet this year, but we hope to. And but up through August, here are some of the numbers. We've given away a total of almost $4 million. A little over 2 million of that went to the growth of amateur radio. 1.2 million has gone to education. 338,000 has gone to amateur radio technology and experimentation. Digital communications is taken $12,000. And communication science and technology comes in at $181,000. Rounded numbers, and not all of those. Here's a list. I know you can't read it, but it lists some of the, well, all of the grants that we've given and scholarships we've given through August of this year. You'll note they go from our MIT grant, which is a little over $1.6 million. Interesting story on that. The club at MIT needed to save an important antenna and radome on top of the tallest building on campus. They were given a very short time frame to do that, and they came to us for a grant. We were able to turn that around rather quickly. And a couple of others of note in here. Oregon HamWAN is a multi-technology development of a microwave and auxiliary network for MCOM and general experimentation using TCP/IP and the HamWAN protocols. They also have some Arden, and I think they have some LoRa and some other things in there. Quite an interesting project. And we've got a variety of upgrades that we've done, and some of educational opportunities out there. A group out of Utah is putting together an ARDC station and LEO station to engage youth in amateur radio. And there's a lot more. You can read more about those on our website at ampr.org, ampr.org. We try to get some distribution of the funds to various locations. You can see here, California's gotten quite a few, but they got their applications in, and they had some good proposals, and we were able to fund them. But there's funds being distributed across many states as well as internationally. So who do we give the money to? So we make grants to 501c3 public charities, government entities, that can be local government or tribes or other similar entities, EOCs that are run by government organizations and so on. Public schools and universities, note public. We can provide grants to international charities and international nonprofits. There's some extra work to do that. There's a few weeks of paperwork that needs to go back and forth, and it's not too heinous, but it does add a few weeks to, maybe a quarter of a year to get that done, and then we're able to make those grants if they pass. It's called equivalency determination, and it involves some lawyers going over your organization's documents and so on. If you're not a 501c3 but are a nonprofit, and you have a project, or even an individual that's got an idea they want to wants to do, we can do that as well. But you have to get a fiscal sponsor, which is either a 501c3 or one of these other listed entities, a government entity, public schools, universities, and so on. And on a very rare occasion, we may make a grant to a non-501c3 entity, talk with Chelsea, if the project meets all the other requirements, including open access. So we have several categories for which we provided ARDC funds. The support and growth of amateur radio education and technical innovation, particularly in the areas of amateur radio technology and experimentation, internet technologies, digital communications, and communication science and technology. Additionally, we look for grants that further the following aspirational goals that we've established in sort of ARDC. We're looking for projects or programs or research that has a broad reach. We would like them to be for the social good rather than just somebody getting a grant and then going off and forming a company or getting a commercial benefit out of it. We really really are looking for inclusion of underrepresented groups. This could be women, this could be minorities, it could be marginalized communities. We need to add diversity in amateur radio and in digital communications. And so we're trying to help that happen. We're specifically working on some scholarships that are targeted to those groups, as well as the more general ones you may be familiar with that are targeted towards amateur radio operators, such as we've provided funds to the ARRL and FAR and some other organizations for those types of scholarships. And then we're going directly to other types of organizations for scholarships in these underrepresented groups. We want to empower the individual and have projects that can get a lot of people involved and that they cover some area, not all centralized. We want to preserve the right to innovate, so we tend to look for like open source licensing, Creative Commons, that sort of thing, to allow people to build on the work that's done on work funded by the ARDC, and some innovation on business models, not truly business in the sense of commercial business necessarily, but the way organizations are organized and run. We do require that anything that you produce from our grants, be it hardware, software, report, or something else, be made freely available to the public. So before you apply, check your eligibility, go through that list of who we grant to. And if you fall into one of those categories, proceed. Decide on the scope of your grant request. What's it going to cover? What are you going to do? How long is it going to take? What kind of resources can come to bear to make it happen? If you want some feedback before writing up your proposal, you can contact giving@ardc.net with a letter of inquiry. That can be as informal as an email. Hey, what do you think of this idea? Or a much more formal document for something bigger. We've seen a few of those. Next, you have to write your proposal up. So describe what you want to accomplish. Use plain and clear English. If English is not your native language, try to get it translated. The very worst case is to send us a Google translation along with the original language, and we'll try to make heads or tails of it. Doesn't have to be a tome. It doesn't have to be long. 1 to 5 pages is probably a good target. In fact, towards the lower end of that range is good. If you can completely describe, executive summary kind of stuff in those pages. Include an implementation plan and a timeline. Typically, our grants are for 1 or 2 years. If you can do it faster than that, that's great. If you need to go over that, we might ask you to come back after some checkpoints to get further funding for further years. So just keep that in mind as you're putting it together. Provide a budget and include a list of what you need. We want you to put down what you need to procure and the cost. Round up dollar amounts. Don't forget taxes, shipping, administrative, indirect costs. We try to limit indirect costs. Those are things that get tacked on by an institution, typically like a university, where they might have a little tax on grants that come in to provide general facility type funding and so on. And we'll do that. We like to see that under 20%. Some institutions use a pretty high number, and we ask them to cost share that if it goes above 20%. So a couple places to visit on the web, www.amper.org, apply. And that will get you into the process of making your actual application. If you need some examples and help of how to write a proposal, go to www.amper.org/proposal help. And we've got some examples and some advice on what to write, and it's a pretty good resource. I encourage you to check it out. So once your proposal is ready, and you can get to this mailman.amper.org.hotcrp from the apply page. There's a big button there to click and go there. Go and create an account. And once you create that account, it will send you an email, and follow the instructions in the email and return to the site. You will then be given the opportunity to create your proposal. There's a submission form that has several fields of information we like to have for all applications. And then you can upload any relevant documents, including your narrative of your proposal and your budget. And the budget should be as a separate file. And there's a specific area indicated to upload that in the form. So once you've submitted your proposal, we have our grants manager, Chelsea, review it, make sure that it's complete and in the general guidelines provided earlier. You might get a request to clarify or update some information based on this preliminary review. Once she's reviewed it, she will then pass it over to the Grants Advisory Committee, or the GAC. The GAC meets every other week, and in the meantime, they review the upcoming proposals, and if there's some questions about your proposal, further information would be requested via the grants manager. The Grants Advisory Committee, when it meets, will take a vote and advise the grants manager of their recommendation concerning the proposal. That can be either yes, no, resubmit. Sometimes there'll be a little advice coming back the other way. Please understand, if we give you advice, you are in the control of what you're asking for. Sometimes we just have some experience we'd like to share with you to consider, but that in and of itself is not a gate as to whether you will get your grant approved or not. It is purely advice from some members of the committee. And again, that would come back through the grants manager. The communication should go through the grants manager, or early in the process, I often will be involved. So the recommendation from the GAC is then passed to the board for the final decision and vote. If approved by the board, you'll be notified and arrangements made for us to release funds to you. Yay, money in the bank. The treasurer disperses those funds after all paperwork is completed, including a contract that lays out the terms of the grant. So be prepared to review that and sign it and get it back to us. So finally, the other side of the house is the Technical Advisory Committee. And they've been up to quite a few things this year and are continuing to do so. They did a rather exhaustive study on the current utilization of our IPv4 address space. You see two subnets there out of block 44. It originally was 44/8, but we sold off a quarter of those addresses, 4 million addresses, a couple of years back at the formation of ARDC. The funds from that created a rather large endowment, which causes us to have to give away several $1 million a year or the IRS will remove our nonprofit 501c3 status, and that would be not so good because then taxes get involved in a whole bunch of stuff. So they've done this study. They kind of understand where the addresses are being used and somewhat what they're being used for. They can only be used for amateur radio activities. So if you have an idea to come get some addresses and use them for something that's not amateur radio or related, probably will get denied. So they're looking into use cases within that address space for both routing to the internet and also some address blocks that are purely for intranet, ham to ham kind of stuff. So they're working on a plan to implement a distributed points of presence using VPN for distribution of addresses to form a backbone for the network. And this is really going to be a powerful and exciting event. It's an ability for someone to request a subnet for use, either static or dynamic addresses, and have those shipped over a VPN to your router, and then you can distribute those further within your station or your community network or whatever. Pretty exciting stuff. There will be multiple VPN technologies supported. More to come on that. We want to create a simpler and better client connectivity, kind of a plug and play router, or at least formulas for some of the common systems that might be used. But we want to get it down to where, it's kind of like the hotspots on digital voice. You plug them in, you put in your credentials, and it hooks up to the rest of the network and distributes addresses to you. And that's pretty exciting. We'll continue to support subnets that are /24 or larger. If you have your own data center and your own connection to the internet where you can advertise those addresses, the POP system will allow, even if you have a couple addresses or a very small network, a /29, you can get some addresses, and they can be up basically 24/7. I've been experimenting with this type of technology myself for a few years now, and it works pretty well. The group will also be recommending better provisioning, management, and monitoring tools for the network. They want to include IPv6 space into the amateur radio internet. That could also be distributed over this backbone point of presence system. By the way, those points of presence will be geographically dispersed, probably North America, Europe, somewhere Asia, depends on how big the communities are, to cut down latency and not have a single point of failure and congestion in the network. So exciting times. Stay tuned, get involved, subscribe to our newsletter and get updates on a regular basis. You can subscribe to the newsletter on our site, amper.org. It's on the right, and just go over and click and join the newsletter. You will not get spammed with continuous stuff, but a regular newsletter. So we're to the Q&A portion of the presentation. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope this was useful to you. And let's start the Q&A.